Good evening and welcome to this interfaith panel sponsored by the library and the Monroeville Interfaith Ministerium. I want to take this opportunity to welcome all of you here this evening and express my thanks to a number of persons. First of all of you again for being here. Secondly, to the members of our panel for coming and sharing in this program. Also for the library that joins with us in sponsoring at least two programs, these interfaith panels, as well as a program entitled Ask an Imam, a rabbi, a clergy, or a religious leader. We have a number of those programs scheduled in the future. In fact, I would encourage you to pick up the flyer that features the Ask a Clergy program. And you will note the dates that are listed there and the religious faith that is present at those programs. This is an opportunity for those of us who live in the greater Monroeville area to come and be exposed to a religious tradition that is an important part of our community. Also, we continue to sponsor these interfaith panels where the various religious leaders and religious traditions in Monroeville are represented as they address a variety of topics. This evening's panel will be mental health and suicide. And as we look ahead, we have other programs that have been designated in addition to those programs represented on flyers that are available. If you, as a member of this community or a participant here tonight, have a topic you would be interested in, please speak to me or to Rabbi Barbara Simons, who coordinates this program, and we would be happy to consider forming a panel around that subject. Also would like to invite all of you to come to our community Thanksgiving table, which will be held Monday, November 25th at 7 p.m. at Temple David, 4415 Northern Pike, Monroeville. And we have flyers around that also describe that program. Without any further ado, I'm going to ask each panel member, beginning with Reverend Stephanie at my left, to go down and make a presentation for 5 to 7 minutes. We're not going to be too legalistic about this, on the subject of mental health. And then we're going to open it up and invite questions to our panel members from any of you in our audience. I was thinking if we had a larger number, and I wish we did, I would ask you to stand. We probably don't need that, but if you want to identify an individual member, please ask your question to that person. If it's a general question, we'll throw it open and give any of our panel members an opportunity to respond to any particular question. I don't want to take any more time, but I would like to begin, if I could, by reading the World Health Organization's definition of mental health. Mental health, they write, is a state of well-being in which the individual realizes her or his own abilities, can cope with normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. With that definition in mind, I would ask Reverend Stephanie to begin. Identify yourself and your tradition, and we will proceed down the panel.
Okay, good night, good evening, everyone. Not good night, not yet. So I'm Reverend Stephanie Gannon. I am a Unitarian Universalist minister, and I'm also a mental health chaplain. I work at the VA in Oakland, in Pittsburgh, and my specialization is mental health and addictions. So I want to start tonight's panel by asking you all, or inviting you all, if you would, to rise if you or someone you love has a mental health diagnosis. To stand if you or someone that you love has a mental health diagnosis. So this is just to give us an idea of how many of us are touched by mental health. How about, have you ever known anyone who has taken their own life? Have you known someone who's taken their own life? As you notice, many of us as clergy have known someone, or perhaps many people. I work with veterans, so as probably all of you know, but there's a very high rate of suicide among veterans. So that's one of the things in working with vets that I unfortunately have to deal with quite regularly. In my ministry, I really feel called to mental health work, partly because of my own family background. So that's where I want to start. So, because I feel like with mental health, there is one of the main issues with treatment and the reception of mental health is that there's so much stigma. So if I, as a clergy person, can talk about my own background with that, I think that could be helpful in trying to break some of that stigma. So I'm the child of 2 alcoholics. My mom had mental illness, severe mental illness that went undiagnosed. So we think that she had bipolar disorder. I've had cousins who had issues with addiction, with cocaine, with alcoholism. I had an uncle who died of cirrhosis at age 48. So I really know about mental illness firsthand. I myself had some mental health problems. I had an eating disorder for 4 years. I've been in and out of therapy for many years, and I found it extremely helpful. So I just want to start there. To sort of, I feel like part of my role is to help break the stigma around getting treatment and talking about it. So for those of you who may not know, about 1 in 4 Americans has a mental health diagnosis. So about 25% of the population has a mental health diagnosis. How many people talk about this? I would argue not enough. So as clergy, this is one thing that's really important. I feel like in my ministry as a Unitarian Universalist minister, to preach about mental health issues, to talk about them, is really important. And I feel like mental health is a justice issue. I feel like all people have a right to mental health and wellness. And it's interesting, as clergy people, we're kind of like on the front lines. Depending on your community, individuals may not seek treatment in a hospital setting or in the community. They may not go to a therapist. They may not be comfortable talking with their medical doctor. Hey, I'm depressed. My wife just died. I don't know what to do. Hey, I'm drinking more than I think I should be. What should I do? So they may not go and speak with a medical professional, but they may feel comfortable speaking to one of us. So one of the ironies is that in seminary education, typically we don't learn anything about mental health treatments, and I feel like this is a real deficiency. I focused on that in my seminary. My major was psychiatry and religion, so that was really important to me. But I feel like clergy need more training in this area, and we need to know how to make referrals when a parishioner comes to us and they don't know, they really have some serious mental health issues. We need to know when we can help and when we might be doing So that's very important. One of the things that clergy could do is they could take mental health first aid training. That's something that I would recommend. So I'm going to switch now very briefly to theology, because you might be wondering, hey, where's the theology part here? So for me as a Unitarian Universalist minister, our first principle is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. The inherent worth and dignity of every person. So for me, in approaching people with mental health issues, it's for me to see their humanity. For me, not to see them as a diagnosis. As somebody who works in a clinical setting, I may know the patient's chart very well. I know they have been diagnosed with schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia. I know their whole gamut of health issues. But I see them first and foremost as a person. And in my own personal theology, I see them as a child of God. I never approach a person in a kind of moralistic way, in a judgmental way, or I try not to. So one of the things in working in this area is to really be careful of the language that we're using. We can use stigmatizing language without even realizing it. That's something that I always keep in mind. I've been working with patients for over 3 years intensively that have mental health issues. And the ministry that I give to them is a very compassionate, welcoming, non-judgmental ministry. I work with patients one-on-one as well as in group settings. So one final thing that I'll raise before moving on to the next panelist is that many times with mental health, religion and religious community can be huge. And it can be a real source of support for people that have mental health issues. Not everybody feels comfortable in a group setting who has mental health issues, but if people are willing to come into religious community, I think it can be very healing. Various forms of spiritual practice like prayer, meditation, mindfulness practices, they have been shown to bring about better mental health outcomes. And so I really think that it can be a source of strength for people with mental illness. So I guess that's where I'll stop. I look forward to hearing the other panelists have to share.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. My name is Ed Shanik. I'm pastor over at Monroeville United Methodist Church. So in my tradition and my background, my undergrad was in psychology. And basically what I have is through 1979, which is archaic at this point. But it was one of the things that drew me to healing. And after that, I did, so I worked actually at the VA over at Highland Drive.
Okay.
I did 1,600 hours of CPE, clinical pastoral education, and that was in neuropsych in that area. And then later on in my ministry, I began to bump into many people in congregations who were assaulted, men and women, and went back into training with the Pennsylvania Commission on Rape and Assault and worked as a advocate for victims of violence and sexual assault and violent crime, and the wounds that are out there. And a lot of what I was going to say, actually, you've already covered an awful lot of that. It parallels very, very similarly. One of the things I realized going through seminary, and I was at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, is that the basic core courses do not prepare pastors to be dealing with many of the mental health issues that are out there. And that that's one of the reasons why I took the training that I did. And I took some background in training in Catholic counseling enough to realize that I'm not a counselor. And so my role basically is pastoral care. And what I've found in terms of working with those in need is to walk with folks and to help them get connected to other agencies, medical health therapists that are far better trained than I am to work with them and to work with those who have wounds of those kinds of natures, and then for me to walk alongside. Likewise, I see it as a justice issue. And as I'm looking at United Methodist social principles, one of the areas that they talk about is that justice issue. They also quote the United or the World Health Organization definition, but then come off from that and says mental health. Unfortunately, mental health eludes many of the world, resulting in considerable distress, stigma, and isolation. And that those who are wrestling often end up very isolated. And that oftentimes it is the judgmentalism, I think, oftentimes that we're seeing as clergy and the churches that create a fear as to whether or not they will. So I think it's important for us as clergy to be trained. But also I think it's important for us to bring training to congregations so that we can become safe places and places of joy for those who are going through pains and going through mental illnesses. There are people I found within most churches. I would say that there is a church within a church. Oftentimes, the church as a whole may not be the safest of environments. So people kind of pick that up as they walk in. But there are people within that congregation who are. And oftentimes, if you make connections in there, you can provide safe places for individuals who feel God's grace, God's love. We believe in our theology, at least the Methodist and out of our social principles, really comes out of Romans, nothing separates us from the love of God. Neither height nor depth nor anything. And that includes illness, that includes suicide, and that includes whatever. God's grace and love, and that we are all created in the image of God. And therefore, we're all children of God. And the rights of all humans. So, what I try to seek to do as I work with folks is to learn as much as I can so that I don't get damaged. As a Wesleyan, what John Wesley said is do no harm, do all the good you can, and stay in love with God. And I find that the biggest concern that I have is that I will step in it, that I will say something unintentionally that may hurt or wound someone. And so I want to do everything I can to provide a safe environment and to do as much good as I possibly can. I work alongside. The most difficult places that I've had to walk in my ministry is suicide. And I've had a number of situations where parishioners, sons, daughters, have taken their life. And I find that oftentimes the best thing that I can do as clergy in that situation is to be still, be present as a non-anxious presence, and a loving presence, and allow people to be where they are and grieve as they can grieve. And to walk with people and realize that grief is a very unique journey, and that people are going to grieve in their own ways. And to try to help it and support, also to connect. A lot of times there is the stigma that you deal with, and there's guilt and physical on the part of those who are surviving. It is without a doubt the most difficult that anything that I've done. It comes at you in a situation when you least expect it. And it is one of those things that I often pull away with hoping I did no harm, and hoping that I did what I said I could. It strikes me that we live in a world where there is immense stress and polarization, and there is an immense amount of aggression, of anger, and there's also, it seems to me, an tremendous amount of focus on performance. All of those things really erode self-esteem. And it's difficult sometimes, I think, for people to see what they are and the gifts that God has given. And so my hope is that as I work with individuals to help reflect back the image of God that I see in them, and the blessings that they are and that they have given. Obviously, I haven't prepared these as well as I had thought. I have a few notes, and but I think at that point I'll just sort of wrap up.
Good evening. My name is Abdulaziz. I'm the Imam of Muslim Community Center Greater Pittsburgh here in Monroeville. And as I was listening to the two panelists, I was thinking about an incident that happened some months back. I had a member of the community call me and ask for a meeting, some counseling, asking for advice. And when they came into the office, they began to speak about certain struggles they were dealing with, certain mental health issues. And I stopped them then and there, and I said, I just want you to know, full disclaimer, I'm not a credentialed therapist, and I can't offer that kind of support. I can be a brother in faith, and I can listen to you and give you some advice from an Islamic perspective that can help you integrate those things. But for any actual professional counseling, I have to refer you to someone else. And this individual said, oh yeah, no, I know, and I respect that. I have a therapist. I have come to you for something that's very specific within Islam, our own tradition, that my therapist can help. And that incident came to mind as I was listening to the two panelists, because I think that we do at times, as clergy, play dual roles, where people come to us and ask for advice and tell us about their struggles, and they're looking for someone to play that counselor role, even if we're not adequately trained to fill that role. And at the same time, we offer things that their therapists may not be able to offer them from within the tradition. And I think it's important to respect those hierarchies, that there's professionals who can help on one level, and there's clergy that can help on another level. And I think this ties into the conversation that we should be having as clergy about the role of mental health in our own faith traditions, because mental health services don't always value or address things that are important to a person of faith. There are many things in our current mental health discourse, which is coming from a secular discourse, that doesn't take into consideration things of importance and value to people of faith. What does mental health have to say about guilt? If a person feels guilty about something that they believe is sinful and damaging to their soul, will they be told not to feel guilty about it? Does mental health discourse take into consideration what people believe regarding unseen matters, angels or demons or the devil, that believers believe in, that they have an effect? Do they take that into consideration? That conversation is to be had with a clergy person more so than a therapist. So having those dual roles, I think it's good to have therapists who offer their own expertise in helping a person regain some equilibrium, while clergy have to recognize their own boundaries, refer when they need to refer, but offer their own expertise. A lot of times, I'll get people who come with theological questions, things they're struggling with theologically, and from the tone of the question and the content of the question, I know it's not the theological issue. It's something else going on. If they come in question about, I'm praying to God about someone in my family who has cancer, and I'm praying and praying, and I know God answers prayers, but the cancer continues to rage. So why bother praying to God? That's not really a theological question. It is on the surface, but behind that is a person who's in pain. And the solution is not to be Mr. Theologian who just answer it on a theological level. It's just to hold space for that person to explore those feelings and help them make sense of things. And, not just addressing it on a theological level, but sometimes you do need to address those things. Now, the issue with mental health, and from the Islamic perspective, in Islam, we place a lot of importance on wholeness. The central theme in our theology is unity, the unity of God, the oneness of God, and the oneness of humanity, the oneness of man, that we need to be integrated and whole. That a healthy person is not one who's only physically healthy, but mentally deteriorated. Nor is a person who is mentally healthy but physically sick fully healthy. Nor is a person who is physically healthy and mentally together but spiritually sick fully healthy. The fully healthy person is the one who is healthy in their body and in their mind and in their soul. So we're always trying to establish that golden mean, that balance. That's not easy. It's not something you attain and you keep it and retain it without any effort. It's a constant struggle to keep that balance, to attend to your spirit, attend to your body and its needs, attend to your mental health. And the biggest problem that I see in the Muslim community in particular, and I can only speak about my community, is the impression that some people have that if they're a true believer with strong faith, then they can't be depressed. And that if they're suffering depression, then something is wrong with their faith. Their faith is weak. And this is the biggest misconception that I deal with. To tell people that if you are feeling depressed, it doesn't mean that your faith is suffering or that you are weak in your faith. Because depression has many causes. There's many roots. There are physical triggers. There are physical things that can cause a person to become mentally undone. Sometimes people think they're having an existential crisis and they're dehydrated, right? Or they're not getting adequate nutrition. We even have the term hangry, hungry and angry. People can be depressed because of environmental factors. Black mold can cause depression. If you ever live in a basement with black mold, a person often feels depression and deep sadness. It has a physical root. Removing themselves from the basement will usually alleviate those symptoms. Hydration, nutrition. So there's certain physical things that we can attend to for our own mental health. And then there are actual mental issues of persons dealing with trauma, dealing with stresses in life that are making them feel like they're coming unhinged. And then there are spiritual problems too, that we as clergy will deal with. The effects of sins. That certain sins, when done repeatedly, tarnish the soul and can affect the person's mental well-being. So how are we addressing that as clergy? We don't give a Band-Aid to a gaping wound. And if a person has a broken leg, we don't tell them you have a broken leg because your faith isn't strong enough. If your faith was strong, you wouldn't have a broken leg. No, we send them to the hospital. Likewise, if a person has a mental health condition, or they have depression, we don't tell them it's because their faith is lacking. We refer them to professionals who offer space for them, help them in the way that we can, without overstepping those bounds. And that's always the challenge that I find, knowing when to refer and when to just hold that space as a brother in faith and offer that advice. So I think, as you were saying, the importance of clergy in gaining experience in mental health first aid, knowing how to spot symptoms of trauma, knowing who to refer to whom in what situations, to have collaboration with mental health professionals, so that we come out of this fragmented understanding that if you're a religious person, you can't be depressed. So the solution to your depression is only going to be in more prayer and more remembrance of God. Or the idea that it's all physical, or the idea that it's all just chemicals in the brain. To take all of these together as a whole and to refer people to professionals, that's our bread and butter, essentially, in our daily work with people in our communities.
Good evening. My name is Mary. Safayan, and I am a member of the Baha'i faith. So what I would like to share with you are just 2 or 3 thoughts from the Baha'i view on mental health and illness. And I think how they came about is, certain Baha'is, for instance, wrote to the assemblies or to, just at the time when the guardian of the Baha'i faith was living, asking guidance, about, for instance, should I go and see a physician? If I'm ill, what should I do? So these are the context of, just these are answers to some of those questions, for instance. So, in the Baha'i faith, we are encouraged to, just during illness, to seek the advice of a competent physician. So that goes for, any type of illness, including mental illness. So in one of the writings, we see that this is from Abdul Baha, which was one of the central figures of the Baha'i faith. He says that diseases of 2 kinds, material and spiritual, and each one of them would have their own means of treatment. So a physical illness has to be treated with physical means, meaning medicine, and spiritual illness, of course, needs to be treated and helped through a spiritual means. So the example is, for instance, sometimes if the nervous system is paralyzed through fear, so that has a different way of, treatment. Or, if it happens that, sorrow is causing depression, there would be some spiritual means to, treat this, type of issues. There is also emphasis on, community support and visiting the ill, the sick, for, as means of, when you say spiritual treatment or help, it's not just the prayer, but the help of the community, whether it is the help that is available through public help or the support of the family and friends, so forth and so on. So I would read, one that has to do with visiting the sick. So this could be a person who's, sick with any type of illness. We should all visit the sick. When they are in sorrow and suffering, it is a real help and benefit to have a friend come. Happiness is a great healer to those who are ill. In the East, it is the custom to call upon the patient often and meet him individually. The people in the East show the utmost kindness and compassion to the sick and suffering. This has greater effect than the remedy itself. You must always have this thought of love and affection when you visit the ailing and afflicted. So that's just one way that we can support and help with the, if a loved one, a friend, or somebody in the community is suffering from that. Now, specifically about psychiatric treatments and illnesses, again, that's an illness, and we are encouraged to seek medical help whenever necessary. So I have a small quotation. Psychiatric treatment in general is no doubt an important contribution to medicine, but we must believe it is still a growing rather than a perfected science. When I read that, because several references was made that the science of psychiatry is not perfect. So I, looked at some references that I had, and lo and behold, yes, all of the psychiatrists and psychologists that they were contributing to, discussion, they said, we still do not know the causes of many of these mental problems or illnesses. And as Imam was saying that, I came, so that actually made me that starting tomorrow I'm going to start my exercise program because, there are many factors contribute to mental illnesses. Environment is a big factor. Nutrition and diet is a big factor. Many other things, exercise and fitness also, just so, and they, just also, I learned that rather than talking about mental illness, it's better to say, just brain health issues, because then that takes the stigma away from needing and wanting to seek help for, those type of, this problem. But so I, so it is not a perfected science. As Baha'u'llah has urged us to avail ourselves of the help of good physicians, Baha'is are certainly not only free to turn to psychiatry for assistance, but should, when advisable, do so. So again, as far as mental health and illness, referring to a competent physician is very important, and we are advised to do that. This does not mean psychiatrists are always wise and always right. It means we are free to avail ourselves of the best medicine has to offer us. So, like any illness, like any issue, there are many means of treating, medical or physical means. So sometimes, we need medication, to treat. Oftentimes there are other means, so we need to, really learn as individuals and as communities. We need to learn what is available and what is the best science at the time and follow those type of things. That's all.
So I am Barbara Simons. I'm the Rabbi of Temple David. So a little bit of history is that obviously mental illness is nothing new, except that somehow sometimes we think it is. So in our tradition, if we go back to the Hebrew Bible, the 1 Samuel is when we have the description of King Saul. And King Saul had, as there are different translations, but an evil spirit or something that would come to him. And then when David, later to be King David, would play his lyre, which is a kind of a harp, it's described as this evil spirit would leave Saul, and he would find relief and feel better. So I actually came across, in preparing for today's great article, and I very much appreciated, which is called, ready, An Unexpected Leader, a Psychiatric Analysis of King Saul. You gotta love that. So anyway, I gotta love that anyway. I'll jump to the end, and they came up with bipolar disorder, which is fascinating. Right? They rejected other things, and came out. They rejected depression, rejected clinical epilepsy. Very interesting, though, of how they determined based on the biblical text what was going on. They didn't have that language then, right? But so we think of that. We also think of, in our tradition, from Psalms. So Psalm 88, O God of my deliverance, when I cry out in the night before you, let my prayer reach you. Incline your ear to my cry, O God, I am like one who has lost all strength, wandering freely among the dead. So there's just this anguish that we hear within Psalms. And Psalms is fabulous because there's 150 of them. So there's uplift and joy and introspection and despair, and all of this, such a human text. Actually, it's a Jewish tradition. A lot of people will carry a small book of Psalms with them, so sort of at the ready for when they want to access it. Our prayer for healing is a prayer that wishes for. Well, let me start the prayer. So the prayer starts. May the God of our ancestors. So it's not one of our typical prayers that starts, blessed are you, Adonai, our God. or rather, may the God of our ancestors, so I like that it's a human connection as it starts, right? May the God of our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, our patriarchs and matriarchs, and then it goes on to wish a rifuat shlema, a complete recovery. Speaking of what the Imam spoke of, that wholeness and so forth. Shlema, similar to the word, right? Right? Salem, and to shalom, wholeness, peace, right? Refuah is the healing part of that phrase, and then it specifies. It doesn't just say whole. It says refuat haguf, the healing of body, refuat hanefesh, and the healing of the soul. So you might wonder, well, what's the healing of the soul, right? So it's right in there for us, though, right? I mean, even though it's hard to define, so what's the healing of the soul? Our text has this for us, and clearly this is about, let's say, minimally agitation or something not, right, being okay, spiritually or emotionally and all that. So we pray for the entirety, as it were, the completeness of healing. So one of the challenges, and I just did a lesson on medical ethics, which I'm limited on here, but I was doing the Jewish part, so I was okay, was about, I was teaching it, was about how medicine was largely not curative. So if the sources I was reading was right, it was until the invention of penicillin, there was little they could do. There was bloodletting and stuff like that, but there was limited kinds of things that the medical profession did. Well, given there was limited that way, it was so much more limited in terms of understanding mental illness, right? We think of through the ages how there's like this idea of sort of there was something was possessing you or whatever that was, right? So that's different than mental illness, right? At least the way I understand it. So this idea of stigma, which I think maybe all of us, or if we didn't all say it, then the rest of us nodded at it, is clearly there in the Jewish community as well, right? In the general community as well. People largely don't talk about mental illness, and so it's that much harder, right? Because it's so isolating. So obviously we need to talk about it. We need to do more than that. We need to advocate for it. So just as both of you were talking about justice, there's so many intersections with mental illness, right? So obviously healthcare is an intersection. Opioid abuse is an intersection, as are other abuses. And gun violence, I'll say, is an intersection, right? So as political as that might get for some people, right, we also want to recognize the power of that. So anyway, when I look specifically at suicide, because we wanted to specifically address that in this panel. So Judaism says in Deuteronomy chapter 30, choose life. That is not the political statement that nowadays some people hear as a slogan, but we are to choose life, and that is understood to be against suicide. And so Jewish tradition, it's going to sound a little harsh here, but if someone committed suicide, they were not eulogized. The family was not treated the same way as regular mourners, but a lot of traditions around this. The person who committed suicide was buried either outside of the sort of gates of the Jewish cemetery or in that section, sort of the other section. And the reason was to not be a model to emulate, right? It was trying not to say, to anyone else, okay, this is what you should do. I don't know, but when all feels so hard. So clearly we now see suicide as part of a mental illness, and therefore, for example, in Jewish cemeteries, there's no such thing as that at all. Even if it was seen as a mental illness for a day or an hour or whatever it might be, that is seen as mental illness, and they are buried within the community. We obviously need to talk about it. As the Imam said, I'm not a therapist either. But today, when someone's talking about end of life and a lot of focus on it, and he was right about my age, I asked the question, I just enunciated it. I'm going to ask you one question. I said, I'm going to be blunt, but is this a conversation about suicide? And it wasn't, thank God, right? But I've had that question. I've asked fairly often in terms of training I've had, which was not enough in rabbinical school either. Sad how similar our seminary trainings are. But I've asked people when they talked about suicide, do you have a plan? Right? Because I was taught that's the question to ask. Right? I was also taught that when I am counseling, that I talk about confidentiality, except there's a but, right? There's certain buts, right? So the but is, if you are going to harm someone else or yourself, this is no longer confidential, right? So there's a but that's built into confidentiality. I do think that one of the ways to lessen the stigma is to get the word out. And so one of the things that we're gonna thank our Christian colleagues here is the Christian influence on, forgive me, I hope this is seen as a compliment, but pamphlets. We didn't have pamphlets. So I brought a few of each. You're welcome to take them, but I can also just show them to you or whatever it is. So we have Life Lights is a Jewish source, and I brought 3 different ones. I just grabbed a temple. Easing the burden of stress, finding the help you need, and this is about psychotherapy, pastoral counseling, and the promise of spiritual direction. And when madness comes home, as it's called, living in the shadow of loved one's serious mental illness. Perhaps the most important resource, and this one is not Jewish per se, though it was published through our Jewish Family and Children's Service, is everything you want to know about your child's mental health but are afraid to ask. And it was sadly created because the son, Alex Edward Seed, whose picture is here, died of suicide, and his family published this. This is something that anyone can get their hands on in any number. So all of our houses of worship could have this. But it's just all different kinds of things about the questions that need to be answered. And just lastly, I will say that mental health first aid is so important. So thank you, Reverend Stephanie. And one of the things that the Interfaith Ministerium's group called the Community Conversation House Community Network has done is held 2 mental health first aid trainings at the library for anyone. And we try to do that fairly often. We have to sort of get back on the ball with that one. But the idea was that our front shop people, so to speak, would have this. So for example, we have a very small staff at Temple David, but our office manager and administrative assistant for our religious school both did this training. So it's 2 4-hour sections, or it could be 1 8-hour thing. We thought that was a burden on some people, so we did it the other way. But that's really a tool. That means that it's not only someone who trained or pseudo-trained, I don't know how you call us, but that all kinds of people, right? The secretaries in the schools, right? And whoever, right? Whoever it is among us. So there are things that we can also be doing to open our eyes and hopefully hearts wide.
Good evening. My name is Harilal Patel, and I'm representing here Hindu Jain Temple. I'm Hindu by birth. However, for today's topic, I'm going to take it to India more so than here, and I represent the entire India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, because culture is same. And this subject does not have anything to do with the religion. And most of the speakers here today talk about mental health. I'm going to talk about suicide and then what the mental health is. Nobody has addressed much of the suicide part. The suicide in society in India happens, I'm dividing into 3 groups for young people, adults, and seniors. Young people, which is more common, is because of the parents' expectation of their good grades in certain so-called final exams. And many of those places where they commit suicide is jumping into the big well or water body most of the time, or railway track. Second one is not getting along with in-laws. So young woman or young girl, they commit suicide. More often it is mother-in-law part of the problem, which may have gone for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and that thing. And third one is, which doesn't happen in USA except they commit murder, but it's a love affair. If they fail in the love affair, sometimes young couple or individual commit suicide, and I have seen that. Among the adults, it's mostly male. The farmers, thanks to our big company, which sold hybrid things, and hybrid has ruined the world. I mean, we all eat hybrid, but it also ruins at the same time the soil structure. And the soil, you can get good crop for 5 years or so, and then after it really becomes like a cement, and nothing grows in it. And many farmers commit suicide in India. It has nothing to do with, again, religion. It could be cross Muslim, Christian, Jewish. We don't have too many Jewish, but there is a few Buddhist. Then comes a businessman. Obviously, there are business cycles in the world, and those who take debt too much, here it's very easy to turn around. In the third one, we call it, and file bankruptcy. There, even if you file bankruptcy, people don't file bankruptcy, they just commit suicide. So that's one of the big things happens. Poor people don't commit suicide at all. You can see many, but hardly anyone, I have never heard of saying they die naturally. They don't commit suicide. Seniors do die because of terminal ill. They probably hang themselves, or most of the time hang themselves. They don't have carbon monoxide or anything. Drug addict is a new one. It wasn't until now, and people used to take all kind of it. I have seen and I have access to it, but the new thing in the last 20 years is all these narcotics of every kind is entering in country into the youth and having a lot of problems. The root cause obviously has addressed here a few times, which is a disconnect to the God. Because when we believe that they had you so shall you reap. So if you have a failure in life or whatever thing, either in study and or love affair or the business, is because of your past karma or past deed. And when they lose the faith in God, they think there is no support anywhere and commit suicide essentially. I tried to figure out when was the first documented mental health problem in history in Hinduism. I found 5100 years old on the battle of Kurukshetra, where Lord Krishna has to teach Arjuna, the one soldier, that's where the whole Bhagavad Gita comes out. So he gave the sermon in the battlefield, which is Bhagavad Gita, what we call holy book. So how do we treat them? Number one, there aren't too many psychiatric over there. I mean, there are few mental health results I have seen, also places where it's not a hospital, but they just put those people over there. Your maternal aunt, your paternal aunt, your sister, your friend, they are all counsel people. So they watch you from day one, or as closely as they can, if you are changing in your behavior. And they won't be ashamed to tell you or slap you or whatever needed to be to change you to act normally. And there is no stigma of this kind in general, because all the 5 neighbors knows that you have some problem. You can't keep it hide. I mean, in India, it's loneliness. If somebody say has a problem, it's really a problem, because there is no loneliness. There are people watching over you all the time, which you may not even like sometimes. That is overburden, you may feel it. So because of the way the life is over there, whatever you cook, neighbor will come and ask, what are you cooking today? She may not want anything, just want to know, that's it. Everybody shares and those kind of things, what they do. And as a result, so-called day-to-day psychiatric problems are very few. However, suicide do occur. Sometimes they are scary, become even political issue. When farmers starts committing suicide, or even young people committing suicide, particularly students. If any student dies, it's the biggest thing in India. Why that student died by committing suicide? I mean, other cause may be different things. So those are the kind of things happen. As a rabbi or priest or anyone, there is no role to play in anybody's individual life, unless individual comes and shares with you. Still, probably they are not trained for to be a counselor or this kind of thing. But my mother's sister would be really watching me constantly. If I am doing anything wrong, or even my wife is doing something wrong, she will come and tell me. This is not the way to behave or do life, or if you have to suffer something, why you should change the relationship or how to talk. So this is how basically Indian community lives. Doesn't matter what religion you are there. This is how people in Pakistan, I know there are few years maybe you can watch for it. This is the common practice is essentially, I won't call interfering, but watching your relatives and friends and making sure they also have a good, healthy mental life. There are few other things that what I personally recommend anybody or everybody here is meditation. I think it's a mental issue and it's a meditation which really cures, because it takes you or it makes you basically thoughtless. That's what the goal is supposed to be. So if you say I'm in meditation, eventually you are meditating on something to go, eventually you become what we call shunya or zero. There is no thought left anymore. And that will clean up your mind. So the biggest healing thing is meditation. Okay.
All right, I want to thank our panelists. We're going to open it for a period of questions. Just briefly, before we do that, I'm going to take a huge risk and try to offer a couple of summary comments on what we have talked about this evening. As I make just a couple of short notes here, listening to our panelists, it seems to me that we have agreed on two very basic issues when it comes to mental health. The first of those is that humans are complex beings. And we need to realize that we are this strange and mysterious amalgam of matter and spirit. Or to put it even more specifically, we are body, soul, and spirit. And we need to keep those in some kind of balance and appreciate, as every panelist has said, the interaction among the three of those entities. To just look at human beings as bodies is to risk the failure of naturalism. To look at humans simply as mind is to engage in the failure we call Gnosticism. And to look at humans simply as spirit leads us into some kind of sectarianism that is not helpful at all. So humans are complex. And that leads, I think, to the second thing our panelists have agreed on, and that is that when it comes to addressing human concerns, human problems, human health issues, we really need a holistic approach. We need physicians who care for the body and the interactions of the various bodily systems. We need psychologists and psychiatrists that address issues of the mind and contemplation. And certainly, as each of our panelists has indicated, we need spiritual guidance to help us to integrate what it means to be persons who bear each in our own way the image of God. there's not always a lot of unity that emerges out of interfaith discussions when we talk about doctrine and other things. But clearly, I think as we talk about what it means to be truly human, we have achieved some kind of unity around the idea that we are complex beings. And in order for us to achieve the wholeness that we are called to be, we need this complex approach that embraces body, mind, and spirit together. If any of the panelists want to disagree with that, I'm willing to stand corrected, but certainly those are the words that I heard and the theme that I think emerges. And part of the work of the ministerium is to celebrate what we share in common. And I think our panel tonight has clearly illustrated that when it comes to the journey toward wholeness and completion, our ministries are very common as we center around medicine, psychiatry, psychology, and spiritual development. And with that, I open the room to any questions you have for any member of our panel. I remind my students of the old adage that if there are no questions, it means either we have solved all of your problems or thoroughly confused you to the point you have no idea what to ask.
I have a question.
Okay.
Is that illegal?
No, that's good.
All right. Doctor, ready? And poor Robert Schaefer here can't figure out how to film this probably, but my question is this. In medical school, because we talked about our training as clergy, in medical school, how much is tension, not for someone who's going into psychiatry or psychology, right, but how much attention is paid to the field of mental illness?
That's a good question. I studied in Damascus University, and it was very few lecture about depression, anxiety. It was almost like side subjects. So it was interesting when I came and did my training in family medicine in Pittsburgh Shakespeare Hospital. That was their focus, and I was like everybody trying to escape those lectures. This is like that's what I'm looking for, and they had psychiatrists, Dr. Richardson, every week giving lecture, and then another day of the week the therapist is giving lecture also. So it was so amazing because during the training you think you're not going to use them, and you're amazing how many cases you see. So I think medical school, at least in my experience, wasn't as good as I thought it would be. But during my residency training, I think Shadyside Hospital, and they did a great job. Now I think better. I think it's definitely more people aware, but it's just so complex that even with enough attention that you get, there's more complex cases that definitely psychiatrists, psychologists on board. Even as like some family doctors may not feel as comfortable as others. I had a lot of training during my residency, so I felt very comfortable, but definitely there's cases that are just, see, the problem is there's lack of access, whether the therapist or the psychiatrist, or the people who need inpatient treatment, people who are having like suicidal ideation or psychosis where they're seeing things or hearing voices. Unfortunately, those people are not getting enough help, and I think there's a crisis of access. Definitely the VA have major problems. It's a very common problem in the PTSD. So I think any help is needed, and I think that's one of the points I want about to bring is that it's very important that for people to have some access and some kind of help in their congregation, because sometimes they have to wait weeks, if not months, to see the specialist in that field. So I think we all have to get better training to help each other, because it's very common, unfortunately.
No, this is maybe more of a comment. I certainly am concerned today about the increase in suicide. And I don't have exact figures, but I understand more lives are lost in a year from suicide than from homicide, which is a startling thing to think about. And I remember some updating that I was doing before my last licensure in social work on suicide. It was scary to think that how many of the people who at least made the attempt considered it for such a short period of time, that very often it seemed to be an impulse. And with the availability of guns today, increase the lethality of all of that. And it can be a very difficult thing to spot or predict. And like I said, it's, you can ask people if, they have a plan or if they considered it and all of that. And I certainly agree with the fact that human beings are complex and the spirit is part of it. And I'm glad I'm with an agency now, Pittsburgh Pastoral, that considers that. And takes that in, can speak about whatever comes up in the way of faith.
Well, just to comment on that, I don't recall when, because I'm sort of a news junkie, but several weeks ago on I think it was ABC News, they were talking about the concerns the New York Police Department has for the high level of suicides among police officers, who of course have access to guns even beyond what we do. It's just startling. They're concerned about what leads to that, the stress of the job and so forth.
And the increase among young people.
Which, across the board,
in this complicated society.
Yeah.
And I think some of the cases can be misdiagnosed as an overdose. Sometimes the accidental, when people are like have depression and then they're looking for something and they start using drugs, and sometimes they may get overdosed by mistake, but sometimes it's suicide, or so you don't know, just that somebody found them unresponsive, and we all code it as overdose, but it could be actually a suicide, and I think that's the problem. It's so common that now every visit that you screen people for depression, so and actually visit, there's a questionnaire, over the last 2 weeks that you feel like down, depressed, so this questionnaire now, because it's very common, and it used to be just for people over 65, not for any patient that comes to the office and get recommended to do depression screening.
I was going to say, well, even my kids, right, when they were young teens and so forth, they would fill out this form that I wasn't to see and some of those questions. But I didn't mean to be rude. I was on my phone for a second because I quote news sources poorly. But so this was a TED Talk, but it was quoted on NPR. So it was a question of, in Zimbabwe, there are so few options for mental health care. Did any of you hear this? Yeah, right, yeah, right. So these grandma benches, they literally, as they say, sort of park grandmas on park benches, right? But they train them to be these listeners and so forth. And so I didn't even get to hear the full report, and I'm certainly not going to read it while we're all sitting here, but it's just interesting, right? So it's also the model of how we deal with healthcare overall. Maybe there are other alternatives, or maybe even not and or, but just and it's just such a fascinating idea, right? Of grandmas, right? Who one can share with and not be judged and all of those kinds of things. So that's something I thought.
I was thinking actually, if it's okay.
No,
okay. One of them was the complexity, and also the sense when you're in emotional pain, you want it over, you want it done, you want it fixed. And we're also in a society that looks for quick answers. And unfortunately, I think faith sometimes can get framed that way. And people come in, and sometimes there are theologies that if you have, I really appreciate what you had said, if you have enough faith, this should get fixed. And there's a sense of that disconnect. And I think a place where a faith community can really be helpful. I was thinking of a church that I had served a while back, and a woman had come there who was wrestling with bipolar and a chemical imbalance, and they were trying to get things right for her. She had gone to a particular faith, a particular church, and they had a healing service. And she had gone 1 week and was anointed, and she came back the next week, and the guy said, well, weren't you here last week? And she said, well, yes. And he said, well, I can't do anything for you if you don't have any faith. Which to me is just and her friend, who was in the congregation I was serving, got a hold of her and said, no, and brought her to the faith community where I was serving. And I remember her looking at me and saying, do I not have any faith? And I said to her, if you just heard that and you came back into a church, you have far more faith than I have. But I watched that faith community, and we did anointing there as well. but saw it more as connection and as God's presence, and as a journey because of the complexity. And it kind of, I was thinking, well, you talked about allowing space for that presence to hold and to heal, and so that we would anoint each week, and there was a group that would just come around and be with. So as she was journeying through that journey with physicians, trying to figure out what medications and all the other things, there was a community that held her. And I think that when I was talking about having a safe space, I think that's what we can all need to help people and working their way through the complexity, because it really is complex. Yeah.
Well, it's not so much a question. It's so hard for questions. I think it's also more of a comment kind of a thing. But you know, my family recently had some struggles with that need from the community for support, and my son had reached out, and I can't think of anything more important for any faith tradition, any church, any community than to just offer that loving support, that non-judgmental, loving support for the person and for the family, because that's the thing that really holds you up. You know, the non-judgmental, no quick answers. You know, not a lot of quick, just do this, just do that, or and that kind of support, I think, is because I think that's mostly what most people are crying out for. They feel pain and they want the pain to stop. That's what my son had said. He wants it to stop. Someone help him make it stop. And the response was tremendous, and it was loving, and it was warm, and that's what makes the difference. So I think I just want to encourage whatever tradition, and whatever the tradition says, having your congregations and the people that surround other members of the community be non-judgmental and loving and supportive is probably one of the most important. And it is complex. And we talked about the body, the mind, and the spirit. My son's on the autism spectrum, and his psychologist was talking about exercise, and daily physical exercise. And that there have been studies on how it can even change neutrons in your pathways in your brain. And it's fascinating to me. Now, for him, exercise means he watches some movie or video and he acts the whole thing out. But he has found that it has helped with his depression and his sadness. That daily physical exercise. And it's the first thing I know I want to give up. Other than
Well, this is what Earl was talking about. Contemplation and meditation is not just a mind thing, but it has an impact on the body and on,
So I just want to make a comment also. So to just reiterate the complexity, a lot of suicides that happen, people are already on medication, for mental health and so forth. But to show that something is missing, medication by itself is not the answer.
And the person has a black box warning, increased risk of suicide.
And there could be something true to that. It's also, my patient sounds, because that's their concern, that sometimes you're so depressed that you don't have energy to go and act on your plan. So when you take the medicine, first of all, you get some energy to do your plan before your mood improves. So if you give that medicine to somebody in the street, they're not going to go kill themselves. But people who have depression have higher risk. So sometimes the medicine may have problems also. Sometimes it's give you that energy that I want to go throw myself out of the window. But I don't have that energy to do it, and now I do it. But just my question was, because that was part of the presentation, is talk about suicide. So you spoke about suicide, as far as different Facebook groups that I don't think you mentioned, maybe go back and their perspective as far as you mentioned some of the way it was looked at before change. How about that from Islam's perspective, from the Unitarian
Preventive way to do is a two-way communication within the family. If husband, wife, mother, daughter, son, father, if they can communicate freely about every topic, almost every topic, then there is no build-up happens. Even if there is any failure of any time, grade didn't come properly or had any other problem in school or anywhere, even in business, you share it on a daily basis, that this is what has happened, then there is the other person who is listening, giving you ear, actually can come up with a wisdom of how to handle it. But the lack of communication causes more mental problem between everybody, all member of family in that order if you look at it.
Is that a comment? There's an Indian philosopher by the name of Ramana Krishnamurti, and he said a really famous statement. He said that it's no measure of health to be adjusted in a society that is fundamentally sick. And so the discussion on mental health cannot be separated from social issues that we have to tackle in our communities. Because we have acute cases of mental health, of severe depression, suicidal ideation, and things of that nature. But we also have low-level mental struggles that people deal with. And to be depressed in certain situations is absolutely normal. It's a completely normal response to certain problems. And it shouldn't be spiritualized where a person is made to feel that that shouldn't be the response. If you say ouch because you stubbed your toe, that's a normal response to stubbing your toe in the corner of the bedpost. Same thing for mental health. And to look at how the increase in mental health problems is a result of the fundamental illnesses we have in society. So it's not just about referring people to mental health professionals, but it's also about having those conversations in our own houses of worship about social ills, and how to be well-rounded human beings and to address the social causes. Because the only reason why we may not be suffering as much as others is because maybe we've had a certain upbringing and we have a certain degree of resilience that others don't, or we've been shielded from many things that others haven't been. That if we were in their shoes, we would have that response as well.
In terms of Christian faith, I think one of the things that's hard, most of the times when it comes to suicide, what I find is that the response is nobody talks about it. Because they don't want to say anything wrong, they don't know what to say. Also, I tend to find that within the Christian family, there's a wide variety of theologies. And you can get the theology that if that person has committed suicide, then they somehow atone them, so they're going to hell kind of thing. Generally, that's not my theology nor the theology of the Methodist Church. But I will say in certain circumstances when someone comes to me and says they're thinking of committing suicide, but God will throw them to hell if they do, I'm not messing with that until I get them into a professional. If that's what's holding them here, I'm not going to mess with them. I think that there's just a huge stigma in that. And that what that ends up doing is isolating that person's family when they really need the support the most. And that oftentimes, in our church's position, I'm really glad when I pulled that back out, that basically that they urge us to survive and to begin to remove the stigma, the oppressive stigma that is on it, because it isolates even more. And that it's really important to get into those loving environments. I don't. If that's holding somebody here, I'm not going to mess with it. But I'm going to get them to help as quickly as I can. But I also agree. I think that we don't realize all the complexity of what's underneath that, and oftentimes the issues that are there. If we were in those very same situations, I'm not sure that we would be dealing any differently than they are.
I think, the person has to be at the end of the road, because life is so precious that none of us would want to throw it out, but, you have to be very desperate, you have to be at the end of your road. Now, in the Baha'i faith, it is also condemned, I just came across one thing that, just committing suicide is tantamount to murder. So you never murder anybody else. But if you, just commit suicide, you just doing that, essentially. So the theology is that God is the giver of life and God is the taker of life. choose who we are, the parents, when we come to this world, and so we shouldn't choose when we leave also. Now there is it's almost humorous, just what I want to share with you, but, I learned something from this. I think somebody again asked about suicide from Shuri Effendi, at the time the guardian of the Baha'i faith, and this is how he says what suicide is. So Shuri Effendi answers that suicide is like arriving at the banquet table, and there is no seat for you there. Everybody is having fun, but there is no seat for you. So when I read that, I thought, you have to be invited to go to the other world or so forth. But yeah, so that's just a little bit of how to look at how to look at it, suicide and why it's not. But there's no, what you mentioned, I appreciate it because, I was reading and it says that, you can pray for the person, but, and all the Baha'i burial rituals should apply to that person. I think that was the background of what you said. That,
and ours
you could not,
right,
change that
right,
at the beginning.
I was going to say, because we're talking about, I think our society is so like, let's patch it instantly, let's get it fixed. And I got sober in the 80s in New York City, and the meeting I went to, they had 7 pages, one for each day, and it was called The Chain. And you took the day, you could take all 7. If you needed help anytime that day, you just kept calling. And you went through and through and through. One day at a time, make it through this day. And I think that's what I tell my kids. It's like, if you're on a bad day, make it through today. But I think we want that fixed, we want it fixed now. It's like, it's not. And it's just our society, and it's such, there's such I don't know, like an evil aura attached to having a mental illness, to having an addiction. You're like, they're just weak. But it's like when you talk to people that suffer through it, and you're with the people that are going through it, I think there's more help, and I think that's one of the jobs that we do as a community. You need some help. Let's get you here. Talk to the people you need to talk to. But even like high school, you can't talk to the kids unless you're a professional. That tells us when we're going to bus. You can talk to the kids, but you have to report, and they won't talk to students.
Well, Susan mentioned something about the power of community, and there really is something that all of us can do, whether clergy or laity, professional or non, and that is we can listen. We sometimes, when given the opportunity to take 1 of 3 paths, we're too busy to listen to someone. We kind of blow them off and leave them. Or we listen and then we want to fix it. Or we make a judgment. Or we say, now this is what you need to do. Or we can simply listen and build a relationship with them. I was privileged as my pastor. In the interest of full disclosure, we recently shared a funeral together, John Johnson. And one of the things, some of you may know John, one of the things in his obituary was he was a good listener. And I certainly experienced John that way. He had a non-judgmental, non-anxious presence, and you felt like you could share anything with him. If we could cultivate that kind of relationship with others, we would go a long way, I think, toward being agents of healing.
I also think that society is increasingly isolated because we think that the number of Facebook friends we have is a real relationship, and so that's an irony too, and that challenge. I do want to say, in my search for pamphlets at Temple, I brought a few, though everyone else should get them for themselves. But the Office of Behavioral Health gives all kinds of resources about inpatient extended care and Resolve, which is a 24/7 hotline, and so forth. And this is through the county, right? So these, again, I only could grab so many, but even if you take a photo of it and just call them for more of them or print them yourself or whatever, is another way that it's not the same voice as listener, but it's a professional voice as listener too.
If I give a comment too. If you had talked about those with mental illness seeing themselves as being weak or being told that they're weak, honestly, as I walk with my parishioners who are dealing with mental illness, I find them to be some of the strongest people that I know in the congregation, and that they battle that daily. There's often an immense faith and an ability to adapt and work with things that I deeply respect. I also think sometimes that some of the issues that I know of those who have taken their life, that underneath it, and we haven't really mentioned hope, but I think that some of those who have taken their life have something or a place where there is no place where they see hope out of it. And that to me is, and I wrestle with the guilt of that in the sense of what could I have done. I think everyone does, and I'm not sure there is an answer to that. But I do think that oftentimes just reflecting back to people the strength to see in them is really important.
I'd like to give a book recommendation.
Please do. Yes.
There's a book I read a couple of years ago. It's I found it really beneficial. It's called Lost Connections by, I believe he's Swedish, Johan Hari. And it was a really powerful book because he looked at the causes of depression on the physical level, on the psychological level, and the social level. Hence the title, Lost Connections. One of the causes, for example, is loneliness, and he talked about how a person can be lonely in the middle of Times Square, even though they're surrounded by a lot of people, because they don't have a meaningful connection with those individuals. Meanwhile, a person could be in a crowd or 2 or 3 people around them, and they don't feel lonely at all because they have meaningful connection. I have the book on my Kindle right here, and I was looking at the causes he listed. He mentions 8 or 9 here. He mentions disconnection from meaningful work, disconnection from other people, disconnection from meaningful values, disconnection from childhood, caused by childhood trauma, disconnection from status and respect, disconnection from the natural world, disconnection from a hopeful or secure future, and chapter 8 and 9 is about the role of genes and brain changes, those things. It's a very positive book because it talks about fundamentally gaining that connection as a way of treating depression and changing the conversation around mental health, more around connection and less about biochemicals and so-called imbalances and things of that nature. So it becomes a social issue and not just a biomedical issue.
Which I think is important too, because if you are involved at all with psychiatric medication, the system right now to me is broken. When a psychiatrist sees a person once every 3 to 6 months for about 15 minutes, and they have no real relationship with that person, but they're giving them medication. But they're not the person treating them. They're not the psychologist who's treating them and talking about it. They're just somebody who sees them and either continues the medication they've been taking. It's just, with my experience with it, there's a disconnection. And that person never talks, with my son, never talks to his doctor, his psychologist. I mean, she's just continuing the prescription that was given when he was an adolescent before he was released from that program. It's just, and that's the way the country is. If you want to change, it takes 6 months to a year to get a psychiatrist in Allegheny County if you need ongoing medication. Like your doctor may be good. If you need ongoing psychiatric, waiting list 6 months to a year. And it's a treatment. It's not their fault. Let me just say it's not their fault. It's the way the system has been set up.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to share something kind of on that note. There's a book that I really love that I would recommend. It's really very good. It's called Insane, and it's by a journalist named Melissa Roth, and the subtitle is America's Criminal Treatment of Mental Illness. So probably many of you know that most mental health treatment now is done in a prison setting. But this is a great book for looking at the crisis that we have in mental health treatment in America. It's really eye-opening and kind of frightening. So,
Well, it sounds like that one of the things you can bring from here is to, since we're in the library, ask the library to get some of these books that were mentioned, right? So they're accessible to others as well.
Thank you all. I want to thank the panel. I don't want to cut anybody off. Does anyone have any last word you want to say? If not, I want to thank again the library, all of you and our panel, and remind you of 3 upcoming events. The Thanksgiving service, Monday, November the 25th, 7 p.m. at Temple David. We are trying something new, and there's information available about that. If you have more questions, see one of us or Rabbi Barbara. Our next Ask the Clergy or Religious Leader event is December 5th. Raul will be representing the Hindu Jain community and making a presentation and then entertaining questions. Our next panel will be Thursday, January the 16th, and somewhat in keeping with what we've talked about tonight, the theme will be the nature of the soul. We invite you to come and be a part of these events that your Interfaith Ministerium is trying to provide to give further understanding, fellowship, and unity among the religions of Monroeville. Thank you, and on behalf of the Ministerium, I want to wish all of you a very happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Thank you.